HRES 537 has been filed because I believe that the President of the United States has committed an impeachable act. HRES 57 addresses abuse of presidential powers by disregarding the separation of powers, devolving American democracy into an authoritarian government, usurping congressional power to declare war. I do it because no one person should have the power to take over 300 million people to war without consulting with the Congress of the United States of America. I believe that if we do not take immediate action, this authoritarian president will not only devolve the country into authoritarianism, I believe he is a would-be dictator who would become a dictator. So I today announce that later today, I will bring these articles of impeachment to the floor and I will call for a vote. I believe that the hour of decision is upon us and we all have to decide, are we going to go down and choose the path of democracy, or we allow ourselves to choose the low road?
What's happening, guys? Welcome back to Dr. John Podcast. Impeachment is back, round 3, and this time it's about the president's power to send troops into conflict without congressional approval, a threat the founders feared above all. A House member declared Trump is devolving democracy into authoritarianism, yet most of the media barely blinked. This is the kind of moment that history books will dissect for generations, and yet it's happening in real time, right in front of us, while most Americans are completely unaware of the constitutional earthquake that's rumbling beneath their feet. Congressman Al Green didn't whisper these words into a microphone hoping nobody would notice. He filed House Resolution 537, a privileged impeachment resolution charging President Trump with abuse of presidential powers for bypassing Congress to wage war with Iran. And he did it with the kind of theatrical defiance that makes Washington insiders choke on their morning coffee. Think about the sheer audacity of what just happened. The Constitution, that sacred document that Americans have been arguing about since the ink.
This is real, Mr. President. There is a countdown to impeachment. I have been very patient and waiting. I thought others might want to do what has to be done, and I say it has to be done. People can differ with me. I say it has to be done. It is the only tool that we have to bring you under control, to let the world know that we are opposed to what you're doing, and we're willing to take action against you. This is it. This one word, impeachment. Mr. President, I assure you, articles of impeachment are going to be filed, and they're going to be filed in the very near future, because we cannot allow the world to believe that the Congress of the United States of America will do nothing when people are being killed in the streets under circumstances that are clearly questionable, clearly unlawful in the minds of many people. I'm one of them. Under these circumstances, we have to take action. And the only action
gives Congress the explicit power to declare war. It's right there in black and white in Article 1, the part of the Constitution that deals with the legislative branch, the branch closest to the people. The founders, fresh from fighting a revolution against a king who could drag his subjects into wars on a whim, were absolutely insistent that one person should never hold that kind of power alone. They had seen what happens when a monarch decides to send armies across the globe based on personal whim or dynastic ambition, and they wanted no part of that system in their new republic. The president would be commander-in-chief, sure, the person who runs the war once it's authorized, the person who makes tactical decisions and oversees military operations. But starting a war, that sacred and terrible power that belonged to the legislature, that was the deal, the compromise that made the Constitution possible.
Censured, but not silenced. And I rise today, Mr. Speaker, because the housing crisis that we confront has taken on a new dimension. I am in full support of the 21st Century Road to Housing Act, full support of it. Many others are. But I rise today to announce that this is now the Trump housing crisis. It is the Trump housing crisis, and I should like to present evidence to substantiate my claim. It's the Trump housing crisis because on yesterday, the president declined to sign the bicameral, the bill that was voted on in this House and passed, in the Senate and passed, bicameral bill.
The balance that generations of Americans have taken for granted. And now, according to Al Green and a growing coalition of lawmakers and activists, that balance has been shattered. Trump took military action against Iran, a significant regional power with complex geopolitical entanglements, without a declaration of war, without a new authorization from Congress, without any vote at all. And Green's argument is brutally straightforward, almost too simple for the legal scholars and pundits who love to complicate everything. He says that if a president can bomb his way into a conflict with a country like Iran all by himself without consulting or seeking approval from the people's branch, then Congress's war power isn't just weakened, it's effectively dead.
Rarely do we get such a thing, but this one also is bipartisan. Has huge Republican support, huge Democratic support. Let me read from an official document. This is from congress.gov. The indication here is that this piece of legislation had 191 Democrats to vote for it, 166 Republicans to vote for it, total of 358 for the legislation. That is the 21st Century Road to Housing Act. In the United States Senate, it had 85 yeas, only 5 nays. In the United States Senate, overwhelming support. The kind of support that would cause people to come to the floor of the House of Representatives as they did. I was here.
It exists on paper and nowhere else, a constitutional formality that presidents can ignore whenever they feel the need to project American military might around the globe. This isn't abstract constitutional theory, folks. This is about real American service members being put in harm's way based on the decision of one person who doesn't have to face the voters for years, one person who doesn't have to explain his decisions to the families who will mourn their fallen loved ones. The founders understood this better than we give them credit for, and that's precisely why they placed the war power in the hands of hundreds of representatives.
Came to the floor of this House of Representatives, and many persons on both sides of the aisle talked about the collegiality, perhaps not using that exact word, but the collegiality. Talked about how this was one of the rare moments when we have received this bipartisan, bicameral support for a piece of legislation, a great piece of legislation, I might add. A piece of legislation that was a long time in the making. A piece of legislation that this House passed and the Senate passed, as I've indicated before, by large margins. But I heard persons stand here at this podium and at that podium and at the podium in the well and proclaim that this piece of legislation was indicative of what we can do when we work together. The symbiosis that was created by Democrats and Republicans working together. Everyone was in a great mood, a celebratory mood. Persons were ready to move on to the next phase.
Who would have to answer to their constituents every 2 years. They wanted war to be difficult, debated, transparent, something that couldn't be launched on a whim or out of pique. And here's where Green's floor speech gets genuinely electrifying, because he didn't just accuse Trump of breaking a rule or violating a technicality. He accused him of fundamentally undermining the constitutional architecture that has kept America a democracy for nearly 250 years. He said, the pattern of ignoring the separation of powers, the consistent and escalating disregard for the boundaries that the founders carefully constructed, was devolving American democracy into an authoritarian government. Those aren't the words of someone playing politics. Those are the words of someone who believes the republic itself is at stake. Now you might be thinking, impeachment again? Really? He survived it twice. What's different this time? And that question is exactly where the real story lives, because whether you love Trump or you can't stand the sight of him, something genuinely unprecedented is unfolding right now. The first two impeachments were about things Trump allegedly did, actions that could be characterized as misconduct or abuse. The Ukraine phone call where he supposedly pressured a foreign leader to investigate his political rivals, that was about behavior. The speech before the Capitol riot where he allegedly incited violence, that was about behavior. But this one is about something fundamentally different, something that strikes at the heart of how the American government actually works. This one is about a power Trump allegedly took, the power to start a war all by himself, without consent, without debate, without the kind of democratic deliberation that the founders insisted upon. That is a different kind of fight entirely. Not a fight about one man's character or conduct, but a fight about what the presidency itself is allowed to be. And it's not just Al Green out there freestyling on the House floor. There's a whole campaign machine spinning up behind this push, an organized effort that understands the historical moment they're living through. A group literally called Impeach Trump Again is pushing lawmakers to open new proceedings, arguing that Congress should have started an impeachment investigation on day one of Trump's second term. Their case is built on multiple pillars: violations of the Foreign and Domestic Emoluments Clauses, obstruction of justice, abuse of power, attacks on the press, and even more. There's a petition tied to another resolution, House Resolution 621, that lays out multiple articles of impeachment, including obstruction and malfeasance, undermining the judiciary and the free press. They are building one giant case, stacking the past and the present into a single comprehensive indictment of this presidency. Their argument is simple and provocative. The first two impeachments failed not because Trump was innocent, but because the constitutional checks were too weak, too narrowly focused, too easily dismissed as partisan squabbling. And now, in a second term with more aggressive use of war powers, emergency powers, and executive orders, they want to flip the script entirely, put Trump back on defense, turn the tables on a presidency that they believe has learned to operate above the law. Section 2. Now let's be honest with each other, because I'm not here to sell you fantasy or pretend that the political math favors the forces of impeachment. Republicans control the House, the gavel belongs to the other party, and a third impeachment is a long shot by any reasonable measure. Everybody involved in this fight knows the numbers, knows the hurdles, knows that the Senate would never convict even if lightning struck and the House actually passed articles of impeachment. But here's what most people miss, and it's precisely why you need to watch this whole video with the attention it deserves. A privileged resolution is not just a press release or a symbolic gesture that disappears into the ether. Privilege means the House can be forced to deal with it, to actually take it up, to debate it, to vote on it. Green has pledged to bring his articles to the floor and call for a vote, which means members of Congress, including nervous Republicans in swing districts and Democrats in tough races, may have to put their names on the permanent record, yes or no. Do you think a president can take the country to war without Congress or not? That vote is a trap, a beautifully laid one, because either way it goes, somebody has to own the consequences. Let's slow down and unpack this, because the cable news version of this story is lazy, and I mean aggressively lazy. The lazy version goes something like this. Democrats hate Trump, Democrats impeached him twice, now they want to do it a third time, partisan noise, nothing to see here, move along. And look, if you stop there, if you let that shallow framing be your entire understanding of what's happening, you miss the entire point, because this fight is not really about Trump versus the Democrats. It's not about one man or one party. This fight is about a question America has been dodging for 80 years, a question that has been quietly festering beneath the surface of American politics, while presidents of both parties have steadily accumulated power that the founders never intended them to have. Who gets to start a war? That's the question, simple enough for a child to understand, complex enough to tear the constitutional fabric of the republic apart. Let's go back to basics for a second, because the Constitution is surprisingly clear on this point. The Constitution gives Congress, not the president, the power to declare war. That's Article 1, the very first article of the Constitution, the one that establishes the legislative branch as the first among equals in the constitutional architecture. The founders did that on purpose, and they had very good reasons for it. They had just fought a revolution against a king who could drag his people into wars on a whim, who could bankrupt the nation and sacrifice its youth based on personal grievances or dynastic ambitions. They said never again, one person should never hold that power alone, no matter how wise or virtuous they might seem. The president is commander-in-chief. Sure, he runs the war once it's authorized, he makes the tactical decisions, he oversees the military operations. But starting it, that belongs to the people's representatives, the ones who have to go home and face their constituents every 2 years, the ones who have to explain why they voted to send their neighbors and their children into harm's way. That was the deal. That was the compromise that made the Constitution possible. Now fast forward to today, and President Trump takes military action against Iran, a major regional power with a population of nearly 90 million people, with a sophisticated military, with complex geopolitical entanglements that could draw the entire Middle East into conflict. And he does it without a declaration of war, without a new authorization, without a vote, without even a serious debate in the halls of Congress. And Al Green's argument is brutally simple. He says that is not just bad policy or poor judgment. That is an impeachable abuse of power, a violation of the constitutional order so fundamental that it demands the most severe remedy the Constitution provides. Because if a president can bomb his way into a conflict with a country like Iran all by himself, then Congress's war power is not just weakened, it's dead. A constitutional fossil that exists on paper and nowhere else. A historical curiosity that presidents can ignore whenever it suits their purposes. And here's the uncomfortable truth that makes this story bigger than Trump, bigger than any one president or any one party. Presidents have been stealing this power for decades, slowly, incrementally, almost imperceptibly. Korea was a police action that Congress authorized in the most ambiguous terms possible. Vietnam was a series of escalations that Congress rubber-stamped after the fact. Libya, drone campaigns across half the map, special operations in a dozen countries, all done with varying degrees of congressional consultation, and none of it meeting the constitutional standard for a declaration of war. Congress has been ducking hard war votes for generations because a war vote is dangerous for your career. It creates a permanent record that can be used against you. It forces you to take a position that could come back to haunt you, and letting the president own it is safe. So the war power drifted year after year from Capitol Hill to the White House, like sand through an hourglass, grain by grain, decade by decade. Democrats did it, Republicans did it, and Congress under both parties mostly let it happen. Content to criticize from the sidelines while presidents made the really hard decisions. Trump didn't invent this problem, and it's important to acknowledge that because otherwise this just looks like partisan scapegoating. He inherited a presidency that had already accumulated enormous power, and according to his critics, he's pushing it further and faster than anyone before him, stacking war powers on top of emergency powers on top of aggressive executive orders until the presidency starts looking less like an office and more like a throne, less like the first among equals that the founders envisioned, and more like the kind of monarchy they fought a revolution to escape. That's the actual argument here. Not that Trump is uniquely evil or uniquely dangerous, but that he's a stress test, the moment where the slow leak becomes a burst pipe, where the gradual erosion of constitutional boundaries becomes a flood that sweeps away the remaining checks and balances. Now let's talk about the second front in this fight, because Al Green is not alone, and the other push is even broader, more ambitious, more comprehensive in its scope. The Impeach Trump Again campaign is arguing that Congress blew it from the start, that the first two impeachments were too narrow, too focused on specific incidents that could be spun and dismissed as partisan attacks. Their position is that an impeachment investigation should have opened on day one of this second term, that every day that passes without action is another day that the constitutional machinery lies dormant, and their bill of complaints is long, very long. Violations of the foreign and domestic emoluments clauses, that's the constitutional ban on presidents profiting from foreign governments and beyond what Congress allows at home, the provision that was designed to prevent the kind of corruption that had plagued European monarchies. obstruction of justice, abuse of power, attacks on the press, and tied to House Resolution 621. There's a petition laying out multiple articles: obstruction connected to interference with the Russia investigation, emoluments violations, and undermining the judiciary and the free press. Notice the strategy, because it's genuinely clever in its own way. They're not picking one scandal or one incident that can be explained away or minimized. They're bundling everything, past and present, into one giant case about a presidency that, in their view, answers to nothing and nobody. One big indictment that covers the entire scope of Trump's time in office, from the earliest days of his first term to the present moment. The theory is that the first two impeachments failed because they were too narrow. One phone call, one speech, and that narrowness allowed defenders to dismiss the charges as partisan nitpicking. This time, they want the whole pattern on trial, the entire record of a presidency that they believe has consistently and systematically violated constitutional boundaries. And here's the piece of this that even the skeptics should sit with. The Library of Congress's own Constitution annotated, not a partisan blog or a political organization, the official legal explainer of the Constitution, notes that impeachment is one of the few tools Congress actually has when a president abuses power or undermines constitutional structures. Read that again because it's genuinely significant. One of the few tools Congress can't arrest a president, can't fire a president, can't simply remove a president from office. The courts move at the speed of continental drift. Years and years of litigation before any resolution emerges. Elections come every 4 years, and in the meantime, a president can do enormous damage. Impeachment is basically the emergency brake, the only one built into the constitutional machine. So when activists say, use it or lose it, that's not just a slogan or a political talking point. That's a real institutional argument about how the constitutional system is supposed to work. Section 3. Because a tool that's never allowed to work, that's never permitted to function as intended, stops being a deterrent entirely. If a president learns that impeachment always fails, that his party will always protect him, that the Senate will never convict regardless of the evidence, then the emergency brake is decorative, a piece of constitutional theater that has no real-world effect. And every future president from either party learns the same dangerous lesson: do whatever you want, the brake is fake, the Constitution is just words on paper, and there's no enforcement mechanism that can actually hold you accountable. That's the nightmare scenario that keeps constitutional scholars up at night, and it's the scenario that Green and his allies are desperately trying to prevent. Now here's where most people misunderstand this story, so pay close attention, because this is the crucial insight that separates informed observers from the casual viewers who just skim the headlines. Everyone is measuring this impeachment push by one yardstick. Will it remove Trump from office? And by that yardstick, sure, it looks doomed, impossible, a fool's errand. Republicans hold the House, the math isn't there, the Senate wouldn't convict, case closed, right, wrong, completely wrong, because removal is not the only way impeachment matters, and the people driving this know that perfectly well. Think about what a privilege resolution actually does, what it forces. It can compel the House to respond, to actually address the charges rather than burying them in committee. Green has pledged to bring his articles to the floor and demand a vote, and that vote becomes a permanent record, a piece of history that can't be erased or ignored. Every single member, Republican and Democrat alike, has to stand up and answer in public forever. Do you believe a president can take America to war without Congress? There's no hiding from that question once it's called. No dodging, no filibustering, no parliamentary maneuvering. Swing district Republicans have to choose between angering Trump and angering voters who are sick of endless wars, who were promised a new direction in foreign policy and instead see American military action escalating. Democrats in tough seats have to decide how far they'll go, how much political capital they're willing to spend on a fight that might not succeed. It's an X-ray of the entire House, and both parties know X-rays can be ugly, can reveal fractures and weaknesses that were hidden beneath the surface. And there's the history angle, which is bigger than most people think. Trump is already the only president ever impeached twice, a distinction that will be attached to his name for as long as the Republic keeps records. First in 2019, abuse of power and obstruction of Congress over the Ukraine pressure campaign, the phone call that launched 1,000 investigations. Then in 2021, incitement of insurrection after the Capitol riot, the fastest impeachment in American history, done in days. He was was acquitted both times in the Senate. His party held the wall. The votes weren't there for conviction. But the impeachments themselves are permanent. They're in the record. They're in the textbooks. They are attached to his name for as long as this country exists. Now imagine a third, even a failed third. That's not just a news cycle or a political skirmish. That's a historical brand. A president impeached 3 times in 2 different terms over 3 different categories of alleged abuse. The activists pushing this understand that history is a battlefield too. That how this presidency gets remembered matters. That future generations will look back on this moment and judge who stood up and who stayed silent. It's worth pausing on those first 2 impeachments for a second because they're the reason this third push looks the way it does, the reason the strategy has evolved. Round 1 was about a phone call, pressure on Ukraine to investigate political rivals, and then stonewalling when Congress tried to investigate. Round 2 was about a speech and a riot, the events of January 6th, the insurrection at the Capitol. Both times the House impeached, both times the Senate acquitted, and both times the lesson Washington learned was the same. The president's party will hold the wall no matter what. No evidence is sufficient. No charge is serious enough to break the loyalty. Now flip that around and look at it from the activist side. To them, those 2 acquittals weren't proof of innocence, or even proof that the charges were weak. They were proof that the system's antibodies were too weak, that a president could survive anything as long as his party stayed loyal, that the constitutional machinery had been captured by partisanship. So this time the strategy changed, dramatically and deliberately. Don't build the case on one incident that can be spun and shrugged off as a one-off mistake or a misunderstanding. Build it on a pattern. War powers, emoluments, obstruction, attacks on courts and press, so broad that ignoring it means ignoring the Constitution itself. So comprehensive that dismissing it requires dismissing the entire constitutional framework. Whether you buy that framing or not, understand it. This third push isn't a copy of the first 2, it's a reaction to them, a strategic adjustment based on what the activists learned from their previous defeats. But I promised you honesty, so here it comes straight. There's a real counter-argument, and it's not stupid, it's not just partisan spin. Critics say a third impeachment push cheapens the tool, that if impeachment becomes a routine partisan reflex, something the other party just does every term regardless of the evidence, then it loses all its power, all its gravity, all its meaning. Future presidents can dismiss any impeachment as noise, partisan theater, the opposition party's default response to losing an election. They also point out the obvious. Trump's allies will use this to fire up his base, to rally his supporters around the flag, to turn impeachment into a fundraising opportunity. See, they never stopped coming after him, they'll say. They'll impeach him for anything. They'll never accept that he won. And politically, a doomed impeachment can boomerang, making the president look persecuted instead of checked, making him look like a victim of a system that's out to get him. Remember, his poll numbers didn't collapse after the first 2 impeachments. If anything, the fights hardened his support, made him more popular with his base, created a sense of siege that his supporters found energizing, so a third round could easily hand him another rallying cry, another fundraising surge, another chapter in the story he loves to tell about a system out to get him, a deep state that will never accept his legitimacy. Those are real risks. Serious people on both sides see them, and they're not easy to dismiss. Green's answer and the activist answer is that silence is the bigger risk. That a Congress too scared to even try is a Congress announcing its own surrender. That the separation of powers doesn't defend itself. That somebody has to throw a punch, even a losing one, or the line just keeps moving. This isn't just about Trump. It's about whether the war power belongs to Congress or the president alone, a precedent that will apply to every future administration, regardless of party. The founders wanted war decisions made by hundreds of accountable representatives, not one man behind closed doors. And that constitutional line is being redrawn in real time, with your voice and your vote on the line.